And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
Brought to you by our good friends over at Skip. It's time for another episode of NHL Fantasy on Ice, Week 10 Waiver Wire Edition. Nick Alberga and Jake Hahn with you. What's going on, Jake?
Another week, another coaching change in the National Hockey League, Nick. Hopefully there's not another one by the time we're done recording this episode as well. And this episode is brought to you by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.
Jake, this one's an interesting one. Can you explain for the life of you why Chicago felt now was the time to relieve Luke Richardson of his duties? Please tell me.
I really can't. Based on the way that roster is constructed, the fact that you're not giving this coach at least 2 years with your first overall pick. You draft first overall, give the guy 2 years to work with the kid. I know this year's been disappointing. We've talked about it a lot on the fantasy podcast, the lack of production from Connor Bedard, the step backwards. But how many times have we seen that with young prospects, the sophomore slump? So I would have given him at least 2 full years to work with the kid. Clearly, Chicago feels differently, and we'll see. We've talked about those coaching bumps in St. Louis and Boston. Do you think we see the coaching bump in Chicago, or is this team just too bad for any sort of coaching bump?
In short, absolutely not. So Anders Sorensen takes over on an interim basis, but they're last in the league. They put up a pretty good showing in the first period against Winnipeg. That's a tough opponent for the first game, but they lose that game 4-2. You want to hear their schedule for this week? At the Rangers, at the Islanders, at the Devils, home to the Islanders. I think it's good to bring up the two previous teams that have made coaching changes. St. Louis is 4-2-0. Boston is 7-2-0 in 9 games. But there's nowhere else to go but down for this team. From a fantasy perspective, outside of Connor Bedard, there's probably nobody else I want on that roster right now, Jake.
Well, I don't even know if we can consider the Rangers a tough opponent right now. We can get into them a little bit, the way that they're playing. So maybe that actually is a game that we can back Chicago and get into it a little bit. I don't even know how much interest I have in Bedard at the moment, Nick. Maybe we do see a little bit of a coaching bump from him here, but again, 0 shots on goal in that game against Winnipeg. Like you mentioned it, the Jets are a tough opponent, but I need to see this kid break through, tough opponent or not. I got to see something from him. 0 shots in a game as many times as he's had it this year is almost unacceptable. So we got to get him going a little bit.
Yeah, I think maybe the focus of this move was to get Connor Bedard going. And I've said it so many times in this podcast. This kid is so supremely talented. I think he'll find his way here.
I told you I got a lot to get off my chest. Nick Alberga, let's go back. Oh, this guy's a stud. This guy's going to be the biggest stud ever. I know he's got nobody around him, Nick, but it's been very, very poor. And I don't care what coach they bring in there. Right now, the players surrounding him, they're just not good enough, Jake. Not good enough.
They're not, and they've tried different combinations, obviously, and it's just not working right now. But at some point, surrounding cast or not, if you're a first overall pick, you got to take over, and this is my puck, and I'm gonna get my shot off. And he's had way too many 0-shot games, guys. Pete, I think you have something on Alex Vlasic, who I actually was going to bring up as well. A little value on the back end all of a sudden in Chicago.
Yes, guys, definitely with Seth Jones still injured. I mean, right, he's on power play 1, points in 4 of his past 5 games. Garbage points. We love garbage points in fantasy, so I wanted to give Alex Vlasic a shout-out.
I love when Peter comes from the grave and throws a name out that no one's thinking about, but thank you very much, Peter. Nicholas, take it away.
No, I appreciate that as well. I not to defend Connor Bedard too much because he hasn't been good enough this year. But for example, over the weekend, he sifts through the neutral zone, goalie pulled, gives it to Tyler Bertuzzi, and he dumps it in the corner. I mean, I think the bigger story at play here is Kyle Davidson, because I tell you, earlier in the week on Tuesday, I heard him on an interview here in Toronto giving the vote of confidence to his head coach, saying he's doing a great job. 2 days later, he's canned. So, which is it, Jake?
Well, I think this is just the easy thing to do when you're management. We see this across the league. It's, okay, we're unhappy with the progress of the team, where the team is going. You're right in the fact that Davidson probably has to wear a lot of this. But at the end of the day, you play your coach-killing card. I always like to say, if you're a general manager, you play that card. I don't know if you could play it again, right? If we get to a scenario, and I get this is an interim, Chicago will maybe look for a different head coach at the end of the year. You fire that guy, and all of a sudden, okay, we got to look at management and, what have you built? Are some of these the right moves? And clearly there's not a lot of fantasy value in Chicago right now, guys.
Is the Joel Quenneville siren going off? Bring him back to Chicago, Nick. I know we're on Joel Quenneville watch.
I would say that's very unlikely. I think the peculiar part, too, is their last place in the league. And then the sprinkle on top, the cherry on top, guys, Peter Mrazek goes down. So it's Arvid Soderblom's crease. Jake, on the last podcast, we talked about these guys on non-playoff teams. You have any interest in Arvid Soderblom moving forward?
Okay, so this would be the toughest sell. I know last week on the podcast I said we can roster goalies on bad teams, and there's some value out there. I might have to draw the line before this one, though, guys. I don't know. I don't know if I can get into this. Maybe choose your spot. If you get lucky, you get lucky. But I would plug my nose if I'm starting Soderblom in fantasy. I was talking more Sam Montembeault. Maybe some of these guys who. I mean, we actually saw Montembeault play quite well the last couple of starts. So no Soderblom for me just yet, Nick.
Definitely would play Igor Shesterkin. Gets a brand new extension with the New York Rangers. But as you just talked about, that team is a mess right now. Like they're not in a good place. He doesn't play on Sunday. They get a wacky, crazy game with Seattle. How are you playing Shesterkin rest of season, Jake?
Well, you're obviously starting him. I mean, you just kind of have to eat this one and go, okay, well, he's my guy. I drafted him high for a reason. I'm just going to continue to throw him out there. But it's frustrating to see these results. And I don't know. Do you see anything in the Rangers game all of a sudden? Like they were, I think 14-4-1 or something to start the year. Like they were one of the top teams in the league. And then all of a sudden, not only have they been losing all these games, but they're giving up 4, 5, 6 goals. And they just look like a complete nightmare defensively. Some maybe think, Trouba was an issue and he gets traded off. But I don't know. I mean, we watched the game yesterday. It didn't seem to solve any of the issues on the back end.
Call me crazy, but I'm trading Igor Shesterkin in fantasy hockey right now.
Wow.
I just think there is so much turbulence around this hockey team right now where I just don't think it's going to get to a point where he's going to extract, or you're going to be able to extract that value as a fantasy owner of where you took Shesterkin in your fantasy draft. Obviously, he's going to be better, but I could see a scenario where Shesterkin's not a top 5 fantasy goalie this year, Jake.
And it's no longer a contract year, right? You sign the contract, so the motivation, I don't want to say he's not motivated, but I like when those guys are working for the dollars, and now he's paid. He's paid. He's not working for the dollars anymore. So what do you think would be a fair return back for Igor Shesterkin? Because you might have to take a little bit of a haircut, but I still think someone would give you a great package back for him. I mean, he's got that name value.
Yeah, everybody needs goaltending in fantasy hockey. That's why I'm sort of promoting the fact that I think you can put Shesterkin on the trade market. You get awesome value. Even though he's had an up and down start, he's had his moments throughout this season. I just don't see a pathway where he's going to be that guy who's like a top 3 fantasy contributor in terms of goaltenders. And I think I'm always looking for value. I think there are some better options in the crease right now. And you talk about this all the time. They're not necessarily household names. Guys like Philip Gustafsson, who you're all over, going into this season has been outstanding. I just think you can actually upgrade from Shesterkin at times in the crease.
Do we see some value maybe up front with some of these Rangers? Like I know I talked about their struggles. Most of them seem to be coming from keeping the puck out of the net. They have actually been scoring a decent amount, and we've seen some good stories, particularly deep in that lineup. Like Will Cooley continues to produce. I think he's a valuable fantasy asset here moving forward. I was a little skeptical as a third liner. Okay, can he actually keep this up? But the minutes are there, and we're finally seeing Prince Vince Trocheck get going a little bit these last few games.
I love the fact that I guess it's a defensive issue with this Rangers team. They trade Jacob Trouba, the captain, then they let 7 goals. Like, okay, what's going on here? But Trouba ends up with the Anaheim Ducks. From a fantasy perspective, Bangers League, I think a lot of people have to be interested in this file, a fresh sort of environment for him. And you can't forget, July 1, eligible for a brand new extension, right?
If you're in strictly a points league, I don't think there's ever too much value in Jacob Trouba, right? Because he's not going to be power play guy for Anaheim. They're going to favor their younger guys. But like you said, if you're in those banger leagues, his value is completely different. Like that's a guy you definitely want on your roster. And I think he's got a lot to prove here. How things ended in New York, I think he's going to come over and be a motivated player. I actually don't mind the fit in Anaheim at all. So from a fantasy perspective, I don't know how much value there is in Trouba outside those bangers leagues, but maybe from a gambling perspective, and we can get into this with Chris Meany a little bit, maybe some value on Anaheim because I feel like they've been playing some better hockey over these last couple weeks anyways.
Jake, I can't go to that depth. I just can't go there with Anaheim anymore. I don't know what they're doing. I have no clue what the plan is with that franchise.
We got to dig deep sometimes and back these greasy teams. That's what it's all about. Sure. But I mean, long term, yeah, I am skeptical of what's been going on in Anaheim, but I have seen some more signs of life. Again, it's nothing to write home about, but I've seen a little bit of signs of life over the last couple of weeks, and I still think there could be some fantasy value to be mined from Anaheim.
Signs of life, perfect segue to our conversation about Thatcher Demko. Okay, so they reinstate this guy. He's activated, and then he backs up Kevin Lankinen for two in a row. Like something's weird here, Jake, in Vancouver.
A lot of things are weird in Vancouver, but Kevin Lankinen has played so well this year.
Please, Jake, it's Thatcher Demko.
But how do you just hand the car keys over to a guy that can't stay healthy? Like, I get that he is the more talented goaltender on paper, and once he gets himself back to, I mean, he should be 100% even if he's activated, right? So if they're calling him 100%, you got to get this guy some touches. You got to start him at some point. But Lankinen has been so good this year, so I don't know. I'm confused by this whole situation. From a fantasy perspective, do we trust that Thatcher Demko is just going to be back and all of a sudden take over his full role in Vancouver?
Absolutely not. I think to your point, I know I'm sort of counterintuitive to my point off the top, but again, if you have Thatcher Demko, he is one of the premier goalies in the league. You have to play him. I'm sorry. I know they go 1-1 with Lankinen in those two games, but I think to your point about Lankinen, 13-3-2, 2.62, 908. He's been such a revelation for that team that I think from a fantasy perspective, I'm holding on to this guy right now, Jake, because I have no clue what's going on with Thatcher Demko, and if he's going to stay healthy for rest of season purposes.
I think they're going to handle him with care, just like a Christmas package that shows up at your doorstep. Like, you need to handle it with care a little bit. That's what Thatcher Demko is going to be, I think, the rest of the season. He's going to get in there. Maybe he's going to play well. Vancouver gives their goaltenders a relatively good environment as well, so I'm comfortable starting anybody. But I don't think you're going to get what you want from Thatcher Demko if you're an owner. And that being said, on the Lankinen angle, yeah, I would definitely hang on to this guy. I wouldn't be sweating it if I was a Lankinen owner. He's going to eat into his starts, obviously, but I still think Lankinen has a ton of value here moving forward.
In fact, I would handcuff that crease. If you can own both those guys, I think you're in pretty good standing because Vancouver, I think, is a team ready to take that next step this season in general, but I think there's going to be a boost now with Demko back and JT Miller's close by, I think, too.
I do like the handcuff angle if you can pick a team that's going to win a fair share of games. Like in a league, I've handcuffed the Edmonton crease. I know that sounds like it's probably hasn't been great this year, but I love second half Oilers, so that's a handcuff I like a lot moving forward. And if you trust the team's going to win a lot of games, I think that's usually a good strategy. So yeah, certainly if you have Demko, I would handcuff with Lankinen if you could. If you have Lankinen, I don't think you need to rush to go out and get Demko though.
Just wanted to mention as well some injury returns. Nikita Kucherov is back, had a strong outing against Vancouver. Yeah. Demko, we talked about. Mark Stone is back, scored in his return. Ross Colton scored in his return, so good news on those angles. Guys are banged up. Ryan O'Reilly, Nashville's done, Jake. Rasmus Dahlin with Buffalo speaks for itself, and Peter Mrazek. Anything you want to touch on there?
I don't even know what to say about Nashville anymore. Like, this thing is so broken. I've never seen the team lose vibes quite like Nashville has over the last, half year from the end of last season to where we are right now. It's actually crazy how the life has just been completely sucked out of that team. Like you mentioned, good to see Kucherov get back over the weekend. I'm glad that's short term. I never like to see those star players out for too long. And when did Brandon Hagel all of a sudden become like one of the top fantasy assets? I don't know if I could buy this for the rest of the season, but he's been incredible in Tampa.
Hey, kudos to him because he made Team Canada, right? I know his head coach is there and John Cooper, but on pace for a 100-point-plus season is Brandon Hagel. Let's get to this week's schedule. Then Pete Jensen will come in from NHL.com to break this week waiver wire list down. December 9th to 15th, you got 3 games on Monday, 11 Tuesday, 2 on Wednesday, 14 Thursday, 1 on Friday, 15 on Saturday, and 5 on Sunday. A grand total of 51 games. The 4-game teams, Jake, you want to pick up guys from Anaheim, Buffalo, Chicago, Columbus, Minnesota, the Rangers, St. Louis, and Toronto, and the 2-game teams, Dallas and Washington this week.
Well, I think Toronto, you can look at some line combinations, see who's getting those good assignments. I think there's always some value there with those complementary pieces. And you mentioned Anaheim with a good schedule, Nick. I know if you go pull up the file, it's not great, but I think this might be a week to give Mason McTavish a shot. I've always believed in the talent of this player. He did get banged up briefly early in the season, but before that, he was on a little bit of a nice run. I'm going to give him a look this week and just kind of see where it goes. If it fizzles out, it fizzles out, but I like the talent of Mason McTavish. I think 4-game week, this is a time to fire him up.
I like that, Jakey. Calling your shot as you bring in Pete Jensen from NHL.com to break down this waiver wire list for this week. Pete, you like that look? Mason McTavish? How about that?
It's tough for me to invest in the Anaheim Ducks. Like, I'm echoing what you said earlier, Nick, for sure. I'd rather go to the now healthy Colorado Avalanche top 6, whether it's buy and low on a middle stat, He's playing second line with Nichushkin and Ross Colton. Ross Colton, remember, guys, was like a top 20 overall fantasy player, ranks third in the entire NHL in goals per game behind Ovi and Braden Point. And he scored on Sunday as well. Good shot volume, hits, blocks, everything across the board. Go get Ross Colton, 50% rostered.
Okay, Pete, you may not like my Mason McTavish. That's okay, but I know you do like Marco Rossi, and I'm so in on this player, and I think he's been a big sneaky part of why Minnesota's been so successful this year, the step he's taken as a young player.
Definitely, and it's always next man up with this team, right? They're really one of the elites in the league right now after missing the playoffs last year, and it goes way beyond just Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy. Rossi's another hidden gem, young player on the rise in Minnesota. Joel Eriksson-Ek is out week to week right now, that bruiser and possession guy, Bangers League gem. Maybe pick up a Marco Rossi to replace him short term and keep it in-house.
Our friends over at Skip always delivering the goods, and so is Pierre-Luc Dubois. I had a chance to watch the Capitals in person on Friday. There's just something with this Washington team. Very Vancouver from last season, the Devils from a couple seasons ago, but PLD, a bit of a resurrection with Washington, Pete.
It's ridiculous. I mean, some of these teams that were just absolutely middling last year, right? You wouldn't have wanted to be where the Capitals were at the tail end of last year, getting swept out by the Rangers. They're now 6-2-1 without Alex Ovechkin, showing that, this was the time that they were going to regress, right? Where like the tablecloth was going to get pulled out, but they look pretty damn good and they don't lose any road games. So big win in Montreal on Saturday as well. So I think that Connor McMichael and that ripple effect on PLD, it's a resurgence. All those offseason moves, Chychrun, third star of the week last year, they got it going right now. They got the mojo back.
We've talked a lot about coaching bumps over the last couple of weeks with everything that's happened, Pete, and we're kind of seeing it in St. Louis with some individuals, and one in particular that lands on your list right this week.
Yeah, Jake Neighbors is on there. He's covering hits like no one's business. And, of course, playing on Power Play 1. He's had a bunch of Power Play goals lately. Dylan Holloway has been fire since the coaching change. You're starting to see some of those younger middle six forwards in St. Louis rise to the occasion and take on bigger roles. So I'm still waiting for Broberg to get that full-time Power Play 1 role, and I'd be patient with him. But for right now, you got to go out there and pick up Neighbors, get back in on the train, and, of course, Holloway as well under Jim Montgomery.
Yeah, it's been a nice boost with those two guys specifically. Speaking of boosts, I think for the first time since he was drafted, we're able to talk about Shane Wright in a positive fashion. 6 goals in the past 8 games, and he's playing way better than Juraj Slafkovsky right now.
I like his line mates, too, for protection. We were always hoping he would be on the top line and stuff like that. But Seattle's dealing with injuries, and they're still scoring. He's playing with Eli Tolvanen, who's pretty tough and well-rounded player, and then Oliver Bjorkstrand, who's a shots-on-goal machine like we've known him to be. So it's just feels like that line has a little bit of everything, and then the spark from Shane Wright. So I think Shane Wright is worth picking up in deeper leagues once again, and a nice showing for Seattle right on Sunday with 7 goals. I mean, that offense without Eberle can still bring it any given night.
Don't look now, guys, but the Pittsburgh Penguins are winning a lot of hockey games. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about mercy firing of Mike Sullivan, and now all of a sudden they're kind of back in this conversation. And Pete, you got a couple names in Pittsburgh that are providing a little bit of value right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not taking their winning streak recently too seriously, but I'll always take Sidney Crosby seriously, and those are the line mates right now, Brian Rust and Ricard Raquel. Good category coverage, both among the 96th percentile or higher in high danger shots on goal in the entire league. So it's one of those things. I don't think I would pick up Tristan Jarry right now for obvious reasons and the concerns through the years. But if you have that attachment to Sid at even strength, and Rust has been a fixture with Sid for a long time now when healthy, you have to get back in and at least consider them for some garbage points value.
Pete, on the blue line, I think it's absolutely go time on Lane Hudson. We've been waiting all season fantasy-wise for this guy to take over on PP1. He has provided an apple in 6 straight games here.
Definitely. I mean, look at the impact. I know on the last show I listened back. I wish I could have joined you, but it was Sam Montembeault you guys were talking about as the beneficiary of Patrick Laine coming back. Really Lane Hudson being elevated to power play 1 and playing with Patrick Laine is huge for him. He's leading all rookies in assists right now. And, he may not be a Calder top 3, but he's definitely a Calder top 5, along with Wolf, Celebrini, Stankoven, and Michkov. So it's a nice top 5 among rookies right now. And Hudson, we got a fan question actually earlier today. Would you drop Brandt Clarke, who's now getting taken off power play 1 here and there? I know the Kings are playing well, but you'd have to at least consider dropping Brandt Clarke for Lane Hudson with what's going on up in Montreal with Laine, I think.
Yeah, especially with Drew Doughty eventually going to come back there. I don't know how that's going to work out for LA's power play units, but it sounds like he's targeting a January return. Last one here, Pete. You mentioned LA. How do you see this goaltending position shaking out now that Darcy Kemper's back in there?
Kemper's steady. He's won the Stanley Cup before. I think that he's going to bring some nice values, about 55, 60% rostered in fantasy right now. I don't trust David Riddick. I don't know that the Kings are going to make the playoffs, but they still have that possession style on their side. I think they're 6th or 7th in shot attempts percentage at 5-on-5. They can be trusted in that area, and that's something that, tilts the ice away from the goaltender. You saw it in Kemper's return. He only faced 23 shots. He stopped 22 of them. That's like a bread and butter for the LA Kings, and that's what Kemper is looking for on most nights, and will return a lot of fantasy value in the process.
NHL.com/fantasy, where you can check out the Week 10 list. We have our own Soto and Judge on this podcast as we bring in Chris Meany for a look at the betting landscape in the NHL this week. Means, what's going on, buddy? What have you been playing lately?
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me here. Yeah, Soto off that big contract was just ludicrous to think about. I heard you guys just talk about Lane Hudson, right? I mean, he's plus money for an assist. He enters on that 6-game point streak. Pete talks about the power play, right? Leading all rookies in assists and ice time per game. He's second overall in points with 18. Look at the Ducks penalty kill. It's a bottom 10 penalty kill in the NHL. So he's providing a little bit of a spark offensively. Inside that same game, you could take a look at Troy Terry. 3+ shots in 3 of 4, 18 shots on goal over that span. 21 minutes per game is what he's averaging over the last 4. So just 3 games on the ice tonight, but a few props, Nick, to like.
Nick didn't seem too interested in this Meany. With we've seen the coaching bump in St. Louis. We've seen the coaching bump in Boston. Coaching bump in Chicago. Are you interested in backing this team? Maybe some props here over these next few games, or are you like Nick and you're just no, this team sucks?
Yeah, I'm kind of lean towards Nick. There's a few players who've been checking some boxes. I mean, Taylor Hall had the hat trick a couple of weeks ago. Donato's been shooting the puck. Connor Bedard's kind of turning it around a little bit, but not for me. Inside that same game, Riley Smith, take a look at him maybe for a point or for a couple shots, over 1.5 shots. I mean, he's got goals in back-to-back, 9 shots on goal over that span, 2+ in 6 of his past 8. He's back up in the top line. I guess we can call it the second line. We all know that the top line is Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, and Alexi Lafreniere, but Mika Zibanejad's been playing a little bit better lately. Chris Kreider. So Smith played 17:38 in his last game. It's the most he's played in a month. You look at Mika, points in 4 straight games, 5 points over that span, 13 shots on goal. So I think it's a good spot against the Blackhawks. And a shout out to Lafreniere too, right? Because the lines were all juggled. They were trying to find some offense. Now they're going back to what had worked with them, last year. And for Lafreniere, he's got 4 points over his last 4 games.
Tell you what, if Chicago beats the Rangers on Monday night, that's it for Peter Laviolette. I'll just be blunt about it. I mean, there's no other direction this team can go. You can't trade your entire roster. You blame Trouba. I get that, but the easiest scapegoat in the league is going to be the coach. They got to beat the Hawks in this one. But how are you betting the Rangers moving forward here? Means they lost 7 of the last 9 games. Yeah,
I think it may be a little bit of a buy low window. I mean, tonight they're massive favorites, but maybe some overs, because this is just a team that they can score. And it's just defensively. Even last year at 5-5, their numbers didn't really check out. And this year they're allowing a lot of shot attempts. They're allowing a lot of high danger chances. Shesterkin just got paid, but he hasn't been fantastic this year. So I would take a look at some overs when it comes to the Rangers. And overall, like Stanley Cup future, not really interested. You know what I mean? I just don't think that this team can bring it 5-5.
I was going to ask you about that market, actually, meaning in the Stanley Cup future market, because everything is just so muddled right now. Like, it doesn't feel like there's truly a best team in the league that we can all go, yeah, that's the team to beat. I think the favorites on most books right now are about 8-1, right? You're going to have like 3 or 4 teams right there, and then obviously you get your next tier. Is there any team that interests you right now, or is it just, okay, nobody's really separated, I want to see these teams play for another month or so?
Yeah, last week I would have said the Dallas Stars. Tyler Seguin, you think, oh, you feel differently about the Stars because Tyler Seguin's not going to be there. But, man, he was so good on that line with Matt Duchene and Mason Marchment. Now they've freed up some money. They've been aggressive at the deadline over the past couple of years. I expect them to make a move. I think the best value on the board may be with the New Jersey Devils, roughly 14-1. And they got some stability in the pipe this year, right? Jacob Markstrom. Over the past couple of years, they could score goals. They couldn't keep the puck out of their net. So Markstrom's played some really good hockey, especially over the last month. Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt, one of the better duos in the league at the moment. So they play a really sound hockey at 5-5. So I would say the Devils and the Avs, now that they're starting to get a little bit healthier. I heard Pete talk about Ross Colton. Arturi Lekkonen's back. This is a team that's kind of weathered the storm over the first couple months of the season with some injuries. But I think, Nick, they probably need some... They need something in net, right? They tried to get Wedgwood. He had a shutout last night, which is nice to see. But, man, they really struggle to keep the puck out of their net.
Very problematic situation when it comes to stopping the puck in Colorado. So suddenly Boston's starting to trend in the right direction. They're 3 points back of Florida for first in the Atlantic. They've won 7 of 9 under Joe Sacco. Can I interest you in a Bees to win the Atlantic Division, Flyer?
Yeah, I think so. Honestly, I would be surprised if it wasn't Toronto or Florida. But I think, to your point, with the coaching change, they are playing better hockey. But I still think offensively, this is a team that struggles. They're not going to be able to keep up with, the teams like Florida and Toronto. But I really like where the Leafs are at. I mean, I don't know if the last time I've said that. They got a good tandem between the pipes, and, offensively, we know that they can score goals, and defensively they made some really nice moves, right? Chris Tanev was awesome last year for Dallas in the playoffs, shutting down some big time players. And Florida, Matthew Tkachuk is just straight up feeling it right now. So until somebody knocks them off, I just feel like they're the team to beat in the Atlantic.
I kind of like that Matthew Tkachuk assist prop right now. Usually sits around -110, something in that range. It feels like he picks one up, at least one every single game. I actually had that Boston to win the Atlantic bet before the season, guys, and I already waved the white flag on it. So it's kind of back, which is good to see. I guess we'll see where it goes. Meanie, the two big stories, one in the West, one in the East, maybe surprise stories for a lot of people, Washington and Minnesota. Are we just all, okay, we've seen enough sample size, we can fully buy in on these teams? Or do you think we could actually sell at some point here and maybe start to fade one or both of these teams?
Yeah, Washington was a team that I thought maybe when Ovechkin went down, we had the article over at NHL.com/fantasy taking a look at some of the edge statistics from the Capitals. And, there were a lot of players that were, had a career high shooting percentage. I think there was 8 at the time, north of 20%, but they keep getting it done. Like, Nick, you saw them live on Friday. You saw them live at the Bell Center on Saturday. A really strong third period from them. Pierre-Luc Dubois, it looks like the Pierre-Luc Dubois of the Winnipeg days, getting the usage and the ice time and the opportunity. And Jacob Churkin was a really nice ad for them. It was just really John Carlson on the back end, and Logan Thompson made some unbelievable saves in that game. So that would be, between the two teams, Jake, I would say maybe there's some sell high options on Washington, but they've been sound defensively for years. Kaprizov's tied for the league lead in points. Gustafson's playing fantastic. Heard Pete talk about Marco Rossi. This is another guy too, like plus money for a point tomorrow against Utah. He's got 23 points in 27 games, career high in ice time. And Matt Boldy is third in shots and points at 5-5. So even without Joel Eriksson Ek, that top line has not missed a beat. So I believe in the Wild.
That would be an outstanding Stanley Cup final right there. Minnesota and the Washington Capitals. Who would have projected that to start the year? Means excellent job. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, guys.
Chris Meany, so just to wrap here, Jake, some plays for the next couple days. I like the Line A shot prop here. Okay. On Monday night, the Ducks visiting the Montreal Canadiens. He's cleared in 2 of 3 here. Pretty decent start for Line A in Montreal.
I don't mind playing the goal prop there as well. He's always been such a confidence-driven player that, okay, he gets off to this nice start, scores a couple early. Now he's feeling himself a little bit. I think if he didn't score right away, we could see him get in the cooler pretty quickly. I'm really curious what we see in Carolina on Tuesday night. The Sharks have maybe finally hit that spot where it's just too much for them, right? They were a good story, get blasted by Tampa, obviously lose to Florida as well. So I expect probably more of the same in Carolina. I think the Canes Canes regulation, Canes puck line, probably the play there, and a bunch of Canes props. I think you could load up on the Hurricanes in that game.
Another spot I like, Calgary at Nashville on Tuesday. I know the Flames have a massive losing streak on the road right now, but I just do not believe in the Nashville Predators. So I'm going to play the Flames on the road in that game, Jake.
I was actually going to mention that one as well. I think some people might say, okay, at some point it's going to be time to back Nashville, right? They're going to figure it out. Maybe we get a little bit of value. I just think that team's completely broken. I watched them come through Toronto, watched them live, and then they just looked worse the next night. So I don't think we could back them until further notice. I do think Edmonton might be starting to crank it up a little bit here. They play Tampa at home on Tuesday night. I think, and again, I'm not breaking any ground with this one, but McDavid over 1.5 points. I think that's a market that you just continue to hit right now. It feels like he's cranked it up. He's found that high level McDavid, and if we can find any ways to back him, I'm always interested in backing the best player in the world.
Starting to cook big time. The debut episode of NHL Unscripted with Adnan Virk and former NHLer Jason Demers is now out. This new podcast is part of the new NHL and iHeart collaboration. Episode 1 joined Adnan and JD as they welcome guest The Kid Merrow. Plus, coming off the Four Nations face-off roster announcements last week, the boys unveiled their all-snub team. NHL Unscripted is available on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcast. Jake, looking forward to Thursday, Week 10 mailbag. How about that, Jakey boy?
Which coach will be fired by the time we talk again on Thursday? Take your pick. There's a couple decent options right now, but it feels like that's where the league is right now. So we'll see what the next couple days brings. Again,
I'm telling you right now, Peter Laviolette, the Rangers better win that game or they're in big time trouble, Jake. So we'll see what happens.
I think I'm worried for Bruno in Nashville as well. I think a lot of us are. So, a few hot seats around the league right now.
A lot of hot seats, certainly on this podcast as well. Thank you to producer Bob Bender, Phil Constantino as well, Pete Jensen, Chris Meany. Great job today for Jake Hahn. I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy on Ice, delivered by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.